Okay, so thank you very much for opting for this course, CS3102, which is an introductory course for writing for programming in Python. I am Doipayan. I'll be your instructor for this course. So the regular schedule of the course is Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Uh, for the Thursday period, which is from 5 to 7, we can have some extra, I mean, like we can have an extended 2-hour class as well, depending on the need. Also, some class tests and some discussions can also be taking place in this period. Uh, although the recordings will be, although the recording of the all the classes will be shared with you, but I'd really like you to attend the live class so that we can interact directly. I mean, other than that, I mean, of course, you can keep the recordings as a reference, but live classes are always better so that you can, I mean, you will be able to ask question on the fly whenever you are, I mean, you are facing any problem that I am telling in the live class. So regarding interaction, please feel free to, I mean, drop me an email at any time regarding any problem that you are facing to my mail ID. It will be better. I mean, it's not actually mandatory. It's for my end. It will be better if you keep CS3102 in the subject. So in that case, it will be easier for me to, I mean, kind of cluster the emails together for future references as well. And if you, I mean, if any of your concerns are, I mean, directed for all the participants of this CS3102 course, please send an email to this email ID, which is a group. Sending an email into this group will, I mean, I will also be getting the mail, but of course, I mean, I would prefer to keep me in the, I mean, in the direct mailing at mailing list and keep a CC, which is a carbon copy of this email ID. Okay. Uh, as you, I mean, already have understood that connection drop is really unavoidable. But don't worry, I have actually 3 active connections at my end. If one drops, I'll be joining back with another connection within a minute. So please stay there. I'll be there. I mean, I'll be joining as soon as possible. I am not expecting the same thing from you. So of course, that's why the class recording, all the lectures will be recorded and will be shared with you guys after the class. But again, if a connection drop happens at your end, please try to join the class after that. I mean, after whenever you back. So the evaluation of the course will be tentatively based on 4 assignments, 2 tests, and an end-sem Viva, end-sem like Viva, in which I'll be interacting with you guys. Basically, I'll be asking you some question. I'll be breaking you up with some in some groups, and I'll be asking you some questions. For the reference for this course, these are some of the books which are not actually freely available in the internet. I mean, which are actually books that are not freely available in the internet, but if you want to have a look, you can buy 1 or 2 of them. But of course, there are so many other materials available in the internet which you can actually use. Some of these books are, for example, this one is actually available freely. And if you try to find all of them, you'll be, at some point, you will be finding all of them freely available in the internet. So just to not, I mean, kind of to keep the plagiarism or the piracy thing at bay, I'm saying that these are not available, but these are mostly available in the internet. Just you have to look it up with the right query in the Google. So first thing, what this course is all about. So the basic thing that we'll be learning is how to write computer programs. So we will be starting with the basic computer architecture, and later on, after a couple of classes, we will be starting with how to write computer programs in Python. So that is, we will be learning the Python programming language as a computer programming language. But the thing is, some of the concepts that we will be learning in this course can be applied while learning some other programming languages like Scala or Java as well. So bottom line is, if you learn this in a better way, I mean in the correct way, you will be able to apply your knowledge into learning other languages as well. And also another aspect of this course will be, at the end of this course, I hope you will be able to solve them using writing some Python programs. And of course, what this course is not about. So this course is not about the detailed fundamentals of computer science, like how the computer architecture is actually, I mean, manipulating things and all. Although I'll be briefly, touching all of them, but this is not actually the main focus of this course. Also, the main focus of this course is not theoretical computer science, that is, say the runtime complexity computation or the optimization thing. These are not actually the main aspects of this course. Also, this course is not about machine learning or deep learning. But as you may know, there are so many freely available packages available as part of Python, using which you will be able to write some machine learning codes or deep learning codes. So at the end of this course, if you learn the Python programming correctly or in the right way, you will be able to write the Python programs using, say, scikit-learn or TensorFlow, which use this, which actually implements this machine learning algorithms or deep learning algorithms, and you will be able to solve some practical problems. So again, the tentative planning of the course is something like this. So week by week, I have roughly broken up the whole course. So there will be 4 assignments at least. So after 2 or 3 weeks, there will be 1 assignment. Be 1 test after. I'm online, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, sir.
So after 1 or 2, 2 or 3 assignments, there will be 1 test, and after that there will be another test, and after the course completion, there will be 1 viva. So today's agenda, we will be discussing the basic computer structure or basic computer architecture. Then I'll be discussing the basic flow of a computer program development, and then different aspects of programming languages will be discussed, starting with the basic computer structure. So fundamentally, what actually do is it performs a set of calculation or set of computation, as you can see. So based on those calculations, they can also store or remember the results. So by remembering, as you can understand, that remembering means the result will be stored somewhere in your computer. And by the term performing calculation, I meant that it will be applying some built-in, some operations built into the language, and those operations can actually be applied whenever you feel like some computation. Here, one thing I must mention, that computers cannot do magic. Once a programmer tells the computer to do something, then only the computer can do something, some operations or something. So you might be facing a scenario like one program that you have written long time back is not running, and then in the next day you feel like, you again run the program and it is running. So those were not actually, that is not actually magic. There are certain rules or certain reason why the program is not running in the nth day and is actually running in the n+1th day. So there are so many things that you will be coming across course as well. So this is the basic computer architecture. So broadly, the computer architecture consists of four components: the processor, the memory, set of input devices, and set of output devices. So the processor, you can say, is basically the brain of the computer. But we know that brain actually stores everything. But for the case of computer, the brain is actually the processing thing, or the component which is actually responsible for performing something, performing some computation. Again, don't mix this brain with the human brain. As I have said, human brains are responsible for remembering things, but for computer architecture, for a computer, the remembering part is actually taken care of by the memory. So by the processor, the computer can change a data that is produced or provided by some input device, and it can actually transform the data into information. And the information is something that the computer can actually handle or manipulate. And that information can also be stored in the memory and also be transformed into another form into some output devices. Second component is memory. As I have said, there are so these are basically the component which is responsible to remember the results. So broadly, there are two main types of memories. One is called primary memory, that is the RAM, or the random access memory, which keeps the data temporarily in your machine. So after a shutdown or a reset of your machine or reboot of your machine, all the information that are there in your primary memory will be lost. So that's why it is called a volatile memory. And this primary memory, that is RAM, is actually directly accessible by the processor. As I said, the primary memory is volatile. So if we need to remember something for a long time, memory, which is basically the hard disk drive. So it keeps the data permanently until and unless we, the user, forcibly deletes them. So that is why it is called non-volatile memory. Along with primary memory and secondary memory, there is another type of memory that you might have heard of, which is called buffer memory. It is a part of the primary memory that is used by different applications to temporarily keep some data before moving on from one device or one place to the other, or one device to the other. The third component is input device. As you may know, keyboard, mouse, scanner, etc. are some of the input devices, the computer hardware, which are responsible for producing or flowing the input from the user to the corresponding processor. And the fourth device in a basic computer architecture is the output device, which is, as you may know, basically monitor, our computer monitor or printer. So that these are the devices which are that actually outputs some of the computation results to the end user, who is actually manipulating or using the whole computer. So as you can see here, I have mentioned some words like data, and here another word like information in a highlighted way. So what are they? So basically, data are the raw and unorganized information or unorganized facts that are required to be processed before storing them in a memory or storing them in a computer memory, and which will be actually useful or meaningful to the processor to be processed later on. And the information is basically the processed data. So whenever we are typing something from our keyboard, we are providing some data, and whenever that data is getting stored in a file in our machine, in our computer, in our memory, say in our secondary memory, that is basically the corresponding transformed information. So sometimes we'll be referring to them interchangeably, like sometimes I'll be referring to data as information or information as data, but it depends on the context in which we are applying them. But broadly, this is the this is the difference between a raw data and an information or processed information. So this is again the data transformation flow. So as you can see in red, it is the data. So from input device, we are providing the data which is going through the memory into the processor, and the processor is providing us with the output, which is the information. The processor is taking data and giving us output as the information, and this information is getting stored in the secondary memory, and this information can be provided as output through these output devices. Of course, there can be another blue arrow from memory to processor as well. Like if we want to access some information that is stored in the memory, such as in your secondary memory, that can flow memory and from primary memory to the processor. So in that case, there can be, and there is actually one blue arrow from memory or primary memory to the processor as well. But to keep things simple for this slide, for this definition of, to differentiate between data and information, I actually deleted that arrow. But of course, there is actually one arrow from primary memory to the processor as well. So this is an example. So for example, if you type in the term IISER from your keyboard, the input IISER, 5 English alphabets, are transformed as data from the keyboard to your RAM. It is then transformed into or transferred into the processor, and then the processor is changing them into information, and that information is stored in your hard disk, or it is getting displayed into your monitor. Now, one thing I must say here, this transformation from keyboard to this processor, this can be a dedicated processor as well, like a local processor that is handling the inputs. It might not be the central processing unit or the processor like our i3 or i5 processor that we have in our desktop or laptop. That might not be the case. It can be, actually it is a dedicated processor that is taking care of the input, that is taking care of this input that is provided by some input devices, and that dedicated processor is transforming the data into corresponding information. Okay, any question up to this? Anyone? Please at least respond so that I can understand that I am online.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay, thanks a lot. So now we will be discussing about the different phases of a program development. So first of all, what is a program? As some of you may know, that program is just a process under execution, or a process in turn can be said as a program under execution. But in both way, for both the definitions, we first have to know what is a computer programming language. So a computer programming language is nothing but a set of rules or set of restrictions that are imposed by the programmer to tell a computer what to do and how to do. So again, I'm repeating, a computer programming language is a set of rules that tells a computer what operations we will be performing using those rules and how we will be performing those operations using those rules. And this set of rules will be defined by the computer programmer. Now, as I mean, you might have been wondering why we are not using a simple English. Instead of defining a new language, a new programming language, why aren't we using the simple language, the English language, to to specify or to kind of use as a programming language? So, for example, in this question, this is say a statement in English. Given marks M, check whether a student is passed or not. So, what is wrong with this statement? Can we use this statement as a programming language statement? So the answer is actually no, as you can guess, because English is too ambiguous and there are so many dependency on different contexts. For example, this term say past. This past term can be associated with passed out as well as passed away. So given this marks M, so many other things associated with so many other things as well, like mass. This marks can also be associated with, say, some other marks as well. This student S, this term can also be associated with some other things as well. Or this statement or not can also be associated with so many other things in so many other contexts as well. So the bottom line is English is too vague and it depends on the current context. And of course, it is too ambiguous. Ambiguous means given a word, there can be different meanings associated with that word. A popular example of a ambiguous word is say jaguar. Jaguar can be the cat type mammal, as well as jaguar can be a car as well, a car making company as well. Also, Jaguar is a programming language. So Jaguar is a very popular ambiguous term. So we need to have a language which is unambiguous. So what's actually the problem with this ambiguity of a language? So basically, as I have said, computer cannot do magic. Computer to do that. I am online, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. So whatever we will be saying the computer to do, only those operations will be performed by the computer. So from that sense, if we define, if we give an ambiguous statement, the computer, of course, in that scenario, the computer will be kind of confused what to do. Like if I provide a term such as jaguar, a computer will be unable to understand whether I am specifying to the jaguar cat or the jaguar the car. So we need to have a language that we will be using as a computer programming language, which should be unambiguous.
Excuse me, sir.
So from yes, question.
So what if initially I define that jaguar means only the mammal?
Correct.
And
good question.
Then this process.
Correct. So of course we can provide that. From in this context, we can say that jaguar is basically whether either it is a cat I am referring to or the car. But in that case, there can be some other terms as well. So many. For example, in this sentence, past is another term which is actually an ambiguous term. Standalone past, looking at the term past, I don't know whether there is a term away after past or out after the term past. So in that case, it is actually very difficult to understand the context or the actual meaning in which we are applying this English language. So I mean to kind of I mean there is actually another. So as you can see, this is a natural language. So to understand a natural language by a computer, there is a separate research domain that is called natural language processing. So using which we can actually understand whether the term jaguar I am specifying, whether it is used as a cat or a car. But to make a basic language, a basic programming language, if I have to define all the ambiguous terms that are available in all the human written language in the world, it will be a mess. As you can understand, from this only this sentence of that have around 10 words, we can see there are so many so many terms that can be associated with other terms as well, or other meanings as well. Now consider the whole the vocabulary of let's consider only the English vocabulary. There are so many ambiguous terms in the English vocabulary, and if we want to use English as the programming language, then we have to specify all the meanings of all the ambiguous terms in the beginning of defining this programming language. Now you can, I hope you can understand the difficulty in that. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So from that point, of course, your point is correct. What if we specify Jaguar the cat or Jaguar the car in the beginning? But in that case, as I've said, if we consider the whole English vocabulary, it will be a mess, as we need to specify all the meanings of all the ambiguous terms in the beginning. So that's why we need to have a programming language that can be easily understood by computer and which is, of course, unambiguous. And now a program is basically a series of instructions written in those programming language that directs a computer on how to perform a task. So from this programming language definition, we come to the definition of a program, which is a series of instructions in those programming languages to direct a computer to perform some computation or to perform some task. So what is a computation? So computation is anything that involves some manipulation of data or passing some information from one place to the other. For example, a numerical example we can consider is find the square root of a number. So given a number, say x, we need to provide or we need to compute the square root of the number x. So this is, if we write the program and if we execute. So let's let's together try to formalize the way we can compute the square root of a given number x. So in the first step, we need to start with some guess, say g. So the guess is, so we are guessing g is the square root of x. So how to make this initial guess, there can be a separate lecture on that. But for the time being, let's just, let's not go into that details. Let's just assume that we are making some guess, g, which we are guessing that it is the square root of x. Now, we need to check in the step 2 whether g star g or g square is close enough to x or not. So by close enough, I am saying that whether g star g, so ideally if we make a perfect case, g star g or g square will be in x, right? Because I am guessing that g is the square root of x. So ideally, if we make a perfect case, g star g will be exactly equals to x. So by close enough, I am specifying some error boundary, say 0.001. So if G star G or G square is x by 0.001 scale, we'll be saying that we have guessed G correctly or we have guessed the square root correctly, and we will be stopping the computation, and we'll be outputting the value of G as the answer. But what if we make a bad guess in the beginning? In that case, else we need to make a new guess. So a way of guessing another value is basically like this. The new guess G will be the old value of G plus the value of X divided by the value of G whole by 2. This will be new guess as the square root of the number X. And we will be repeating this step 2 and step 3 until we go to a close enough space. Like in step 2, as you can understand, we are checking whether G star G is actually close enough to X or not. So in step 2, I mean, we will be repeating this 2, 3, 2, 3 multiple times, and we will be at the end of, I mean, after iterating for say 2 or 3 times or more than that, based on how we are making the first guess, we will be ending up with a value of G which is close enough to be the square root of the input number X. As an example, let's say X is 11 and we have guessed G as 3. Then G star G is 9. Then X by G. So in the second step, we will be checking whether G star G is close enough to X or not. So is 9 close enough to 11? If you set a close enough window to be 2 or 3, in that case, you can of course say that it is close enough. But by our knowledge of basic mathematics, we know that it is actually not close enough. So this is a bad guess. We need to make a new guess. So but the new guess, we can, as you can see, we are doing this computation. So X by G, this, then the new guess is 3.33 or 3333 multiple times. Now the new guess is this 3.333. What is the value of G star G, that is G squared, which is basically 11.110908. And what is the X by G? It will be 3.33. Again, as you can see, this is, you can say it is close enough because 11 and the guess is the actual number is 11 and the actual and the achieved value is 11.108. So if you have a if your close enough value is say 0.00 say 0.1 or say 0.11111, then it is a good enough guess. So in that case, we will be providing the output as G, which is 3.333. We can of course continue this iteration. Again, we are making this computation. By this, we are ending up with 3.3. Then the new guess is 3.316. Using this 3.316, we can see that the G star G is 10.995, which is pretty close to 11. And now if we again perform this operation, perform this computation, we can see that we are ending up with the same guess as we have guessed earlier. And if we consider 3 places after decimal. So this is an example, a real life example of a computation, a numeric example. There can be, as I have mentioned, there can be multiple aspects related to this program or this computation, like how to make the initial guess or how to define the close enough constraint. But for the time being, let's not go into those details. Let's just consider on how to, what is a computation with this numerical example. Any question up to this?
So we are stopping here because we are finding 3.316 again, right?
Right. So basically, if we are considering a close enough value as say 0.0001, G and the new value of G, the old value of G, old guess and the new guess are coming to be same. So that's why we are checking. So basically we are checking whether G star G is close enough. So basically we are checking whether G and new G is same or not, or the difference between G, old G and new G is say 0.00001 or using this close enough statement. In this example, we are ending up with a new guess as exactly the same as the older guess based on 3 places after decimal. So that's why we are closing or we are stopping.
So
Clear?
don't we need to specify? Excuse me, sir.
Sorry. Bolo?
So don't we need to specify like how close we want to go, like how
Absolutely.
close we want our guess to?
Exactly. That's what I am saying. So by this close enough, I am imposing that constraint. How close enough is actually close enough? It can, I mean, if we consider a close enough value say 0.0000001, in that case it might not be a good guess, because in this case the value is 3.3160000. But say we want to guess a correct value up to say 10 places of decimal. In that case, we need to repeat this. In that case, we need to define this close enough value or this close enough constraint in another way. You get that point, right? So basically, it is up to you how you are defining this close enough constraint. Got it?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Question.
Sir, the way we make the new guess, is that ad hoc the expression that we use?
Right. This ad hoc statement or this statement, this computer that we are applying here. Using this, we are guessing the new value. Any
Sir,
problem?
is there any way to understand what form exactly to use for this new guess? What forms will
Of
be
course, there
effective?
can be. This is a practical problem of finding the square root. There can be multiple ways of making the new guess. So this is one way of doing that. The new guess will be the old guess plus the actual value by the old guess by 2. This is one way of guessing the value. There can be other ways of guessing the new value as well. So it is up to you. I mean, whenever we will be implementing the code, it will be much clear to you using Python. So it will be much easier for you to understand. Okay, so basically you need to define this, you need to define this, and you need to define this. These 3 parts will be up to the programmer who will be writing the program to find the square root of a number. So as an example, I have considered this. I have guessed the initial value as 3. The close enough I have 1. The close enough constraint, and the new guess I have used this ad hoc statement. Got it?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sir, so
Yes.
this guess, the G equals to G plus X by G divided by 2, this guess is true only for finding square root of a number, right?
Of course. So this case will be, I mean, different for different computation. For this computation, this is one way. Yeah. Go ahead. Someone was asking something.
So here we are making the new guess because if G is the real square root of X, then G equals to X by G. So G
Right.
equals to G plus G by 2. That's how.
Correct. So as I have said, there can be multiple other ways of providing this, or stating this new guess as well. So for the time being, we are using this. That's it. Nothing complicated into this. Okay.
Sir, how can we know that this is a better choice than only G?
It is up to the computer programmer to decide. I mean, we can of course have a second guess as say G star G by 2 or G star G something or the other. So it is up to the programmer to develop. I mean, it will be by the time you will be writing the actual codes, you will be finding multiple ways of making this new guess. So it is basically a mathematics, a simple mathematics. We will be discussing this. There are multiple ways of making this new guess. Okay. So the
Yes, sir.
main point in discussing this is to show you a real life example of a computation. Okay. So to develop a program, there are basically 5 phases. Identification, in which we will be identifying the problem, planning, then actually the coding, then testing, then documentation. And there can be multiple iteration between this testing, coding, there can be multiple iteration or multiple cycle here. In the identification phase, we have to identify what would be the input, what would be the output, and what additional tools would we be using. For example, if we are writing some, say, machine learning implementation, say we want to implement, given a data, say a text data, we want to cluster. We want to make groups based on the similarity of the data or similarity of the, say, terms. In that case, we can use some scikit-learn packages. In that case, it would be this additional tool. So in the identification phase, the programmer needs to identify what will be the input, what is the expected output, and what additional tools we can use. Then in the planning part, the programmer needs to plan how to solve the problem or how to code the problem, how to write the corresponding code. So there are 2 ways of planning or 2 ways of making this rough plan. One is by using flowchart, which is a step-by-step instruction like this. Then this this is a problem where given the input is a number and the output should be whether the number is even or odd. So this is the corresponding flowchart. And another way is using a pseudocode, which is basically the listing down the different set of instructions that needs to be performed. So this is the corresponding pseudocode for given a number for checking whether it is an even number or an odd number. So this is the corresponding pseudocode. So bottom line, to plan a solution, there are 2 ways, either to make a flowchart or to make a pseudocode. The third phase is basically the coding part, the fun part or the part that we will be mostly concentrating on. So before coding, we need to consult the planning. So basically either the flowchart or the pseudocode. We need to consult that planning, and then we need to write the set of instructions in that programming language in which we are writing the program in. And we need to follow the corresponding grammar of that programming language. So the grammar is basically the syntax or the set of rules imposed by that program. And while coding the, while writing the code, we need to have a syntax free code. That is, there should not be any grammatical errors in the code. And then we should be proceeding, if there is no syntax error, we should be proceeding with checking whether there is any logical error or not. So as you can see, after coding, after coding, it is expected that we have written a code which is syntactically correct. That is, there is no syntactical error, there is no syntax error. Then we need to check whether there is any logical error or not. By logical error, I mean that there is no syntactical error, that is, grammatically the program is correct, but the output that the program is providing is not actually the desired one. So for doing that, we need to test, which is the 4th part of a program development. There are basically 3 ways. This should not be 3 phases. It is 3 ways of testing. Desk checking, this is also called dry run. It is kind of taking a pen and paper and chalking through, or kind of chalking through the program that we have written to check whether the program is program should be providing the correct output or not, given some test data or some toy data. The second way of testing is using translation, which is a hard way. basically there is another component available that is called translator that convert a programming language to another language that we can actually understand, that is in English. So this is actually a rarely used tool for compiled language and sometimes for assembled assembly languages and scripting languages as well. So that's why we will be mostly concentrating on desktop checking and the third testing tool that is called debugging. In debugging, what we'll be doing is we'll be running the program with different outputs and checking whether the correct output is provided by the program or not. And in between the program, we'll be providing some test statements to check whether the program is reaching that point, up to that point, or up to that point, whether it is providing us with the correct output or not. So this is the most popular method, and we will be discussing this. We will be using this for debugging our codes as well. And the last part is documentation. So by documentation, it is basically a detailed description in simple language, say in English, to say how the program, how the programmer has actually written the program, what is the different purpose of different statements in the program. It is basically a necessary step to make your code to be used by future programmers as well. So that's for example, if you have written one code and I'll be using that code say 5 years from now, then if I blindly look at your only your syntax, it will be hard for us to understand, because as I have said, a programming language is not actually an English language. It is something that the program computer is actually understanding. It is not actually directly understandable by human beings. So that's why documentation is a supporting description of the code which a human can actually understand. The last part that we will be discussing today is different aspects of a programming language. So the first aspect of a programming language is basically the construction material, which is a building block. So in English, the building blocks are basically the words. In programming language, the building blocks are basically different syntactically valid statements like strings, operators, numbers, and so on. So these things we'll be discussing in great details in this course. The different construction materials for a programming language, concentrating on Python programming language. The second aspect is syntax, which is basically the rules or the grammars associated with the language. For example, in English, this is a syntactically invalid English sentence. Fox, lazy, dog, cat. But this is a correct syntactically correct English sentence, that is fox jumps over the lazy dog. Similarly, in Python programming, this is written sentence which is having some syntax error. Hello in quote and then 5. But this is a syntactically correct statement in Python. This is a number and these are two variables. So this is basically the syntax of basically the comparison between the grammatical syntax in English and the syntactical aspect of programming. This is a very broad, very overview of the difference. The third part is the static semantics. So it can be the case that your your programming statement is actually syntactically correct, but it is not actually providing us something useful. For example, although this is syntactically wrong in English as well, I are playing, it should be either I am playing or you are playing or we are playing. Just for the sake of this example, I have written this. Here in Python, 5-star hello is absolutely correct syntactically. 5-star hello, as we will be learning, it will be printing hello, this statement, 5 times in the screen. But whether, depending on the context, why should we be printing hello, 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 hello 5? So this is again something which is syntactically correct, but actually semantically this is meaningless. This is providing us some output, but this does not providing us something useful. So that's why this is called static semantics. In comparison, the second statement 2 star pi star radius, where syntactically as well as which is correct with static semantics as well. Okay. The another aspect is basically the semantics. As I have said, we need to provide. We need to develop a program that will be unambiguous. In comparison, in English, say if we consider this statement, no news is good news. Can someone say what is there are actually two meanings of this sentence. Can you say what are the two meanings? Can someone say that? So basically the two meanings are, the first meaning is no news is good news means if there are no news coming from someone's end, it means there is good news. Another sentence, another meaning we can infer from this statements is no news is good news means all the newses are bad newses. But as I have said, in programming language, the semantics should be unambiguous. So a program that is a set of instructions should be having only one meaning. So this is the semantics of a programming language that we should be following. Again, computers cannot do magic. We should be saying whatever we want the program, computer program to, output us or to provide us with, something that is we are looking for. Yes, question.
So in the previous slide, you told about static semantics, and here semantics. I couldn't understand the difference.
No, there is not particularly any vast difference between these two. Static semantics means a statement which is semantically correct, syntactically correct, but semantically it does not provide us with something meaningful, such as this. And in semantics, I am specifying the fact that semantically it should be providing us with only one meaning, as I have mentioned here. So here by static semantics, I am saying that it will be something. I am referring to the fact that it should be unambiguous. Sorry if this creates a confusion, because static semantics and semantics are basically two different things. But the presence of semantics might be confusing you. Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes. Sir, what is an assembly language? You mentioned it somewhere.
Yes. So the types of programming languages, basically there are two levels of programming languages that we come across: low-level languages such as machine language and assembly language, and high-level languages such as say C, C++, Java, Python, etc. And different high-level languages have different purposes. So this is an assembly language. Assembly language are the language which are directly understood by a computer. So that's why they are called low-level languages. Low-level means they are pretty near to the actual machine. So they are actually handling the 0-1 that the computer is actually understands. So this is a 8085 assembly language code to check whether a number is even or not. The corresponding Python code is like this: num, this is this, and then we are checking whether the number is divisible by 2 or not, and providing the output accordingly. So this is an assembly language. Now, if we want to differentiate from this example, as you can see from this, it is very hard to understand what this program is all about. These are basically the documentation that I have specified as the last part of the program development phase. So without this, it is very hard to understand what this program is all about by just looking at the statements. As compared to this, the programming Python or any program in a high-level language is pretty easy to understand. So if to differentiate, readability for high-level language is pretty programmer friendly, but low-level is machine friendly, that is computer friendly. Memory efficiency is low level language is more, for high level language it is less. Understandability by human, high for high level, low, very low for low level languages. For debugging, it is easy for us to debug high level languages such as Python, and pretty hard for low level languages such as assembly programming. Maintenance, again, easy for high level and hard for low level. Portability, that is whether we can transfer one code from one machine to one another. It is very much portable for high level languages, but not at all portable for low level languages. And for execution, the high level languages will be either executed by interpreter, such as for the programs like Python or Perl, or compiler, say such as for the programming languages such as C or C++, and for low level languages it is the assembler. Thank you. So these are the things that we have discussed today. Tomorrow we will be discussing from here. I mean, where we are ending today. Any question? So we are